Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. Glad you're all here. We have a really super program lined up for you today. And before we dive into that, I want to turn it over briefly for a few opening words from Meg Phillips from the National Archives and Barbara Teague, our CoSA Executive Director. Meg, are you here?
I sure am. Thank you. Welcome to everybody. It's always a fun event for the National Archives staff and for CoSA. We really enjoy the opportunity to make connections with our colleagues in state archives on issues like this that many of us are going through in very similar ways. This is the most recent of a series of webinars the National Archives has been involved in, including poor Lawrence, who's been on the hot seat a number of times. And I'm hoping that you will be one of our friendlier audiences to hear us talk about both presidential and federal records in transition. So thank you and welcome.
And Barbara?
Hi, this is Barbara Teague. I'm the Executive Director of the Council of State Archivists, and we're very happy to have everyone here and very pleased to have our colleagues at the National Archives sharing their expertise with us on presidential transitions and their part. And then we have two of our State Archives staff members to talk about State Archives transitions. And one of the reasons we have these quarterly webinars with the Council of State Archivists and the National Archives is because we have so much in common and we can learn so much from each other. So I know we're all very excited about this. So I will, without further ado, turn it back over to you, Beth. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. So we have a very full program today, so I will not linger on the schedule. Welcome again, everybody. Glad you're here. As Barbara said, we've got two presentations from speakers from the National Archives and Records Administration, and then from the states of Montana and Connecticut. And we'll have time for questions and some final announcements at the end. So what I will do now is introduce you to the speakers, give you a little background on them, and then pass it over to the speakers to take the rest of the program. Starting with our first speaker from NARA, Lawrence Brewer is NARA's Chief Records Officer, leading records management throughout the federal government with an emphasis on electronic records. He provides overall direction and guidance to federal agencies on all aspects of records and information management, including scheduling and appraisal, development and delivery of records management training, issuance of records management regulations and guidance, and evaluating the effectiveness of records management programs in federal agencies. Mr. Brewer's prior positions in NARA's records management program include management positions working directly with federal agencies to improve records management, and most recently, he directed the National Records Management Program, coordinating the activities of headquarters and field records management staff in support of NARA's overall strategic plan. And before joining NARA in 1999, Mr. Brewer managed records management programs at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and the Virginia Department of Transportation. He holds an MA in Political Science from the University of Georgia and a BA in Government from the College of William and Mary, and he earned his Certified Records Manager designation in 1998. And our other NARA speaker, John Laster, is Director of the White House Liaison Division. He's worked with NARA since 1996, starting as an archivist at the George Bush Library, and then transferring to Washington in 2001 to serve as a senior policy archivist and then director of the Presidential Materials Division before assuming his current position. Mr. Laster received a Master of Arts in History from Auburn University, and this marks Mr. Laster's third presidential transition. His office has the lead responsibility for managing transfer of records and artifacts from the White House to NARA. He works closely with the White House Counsel's Office, the White House Office of Records Management, National Security Council, and other offices on records management, access, and transition issues. And our two state speakers, Jody Foley and Alan Ramsey, starting with Jody, who was born and raised in Missoula, Montana, and is a proud graduate of the University of Montana. Go Grizzlies. She started working at the Montana Historical Society in 1990 as an archives tech. In 1994, she took the role of oral historian and manuscript archivist, and in 2005, she became Montana State Archivist and served in that position until her retirement at the end of 2020. She's the immediate past president of CoSA and Thank goodness she continues to serve on a number of CoSA committees. And Alan Ramsey joined the Connecticut State Library staff in 2010 as Government Records Archivist. He became Assistant State Archivist in 2013 and oversees the State Archives acquisition, arrangement, description, and preservation of state and local government records and non-governmental records of enduring value pertaining to the history and heritage of Connecticut. Alan is the co-chair of CoSA's State Electronic Records Initiative, SERI Steering Committee, and also serves as a member of the CoSA Education and Training Committee. So those are our speakers for today, and I am going to turn it over now to Lawrence Brewer.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a lot of pressure going first because I know we have a tight schedule, and I'm your first opportunity to blow up that schedule. So I'm going to do my best to hit the high points and then get out of the way, because I know you all are dying to hear from John Laster talk about the presidential transition, which in many respects is far more interesting. I will concede that point. So there are a number of things that go on when we work with federal agencies. And, you know, as you all know, records management is important all the time, but it's even more important during a transition. There's so much, you know, turnover and churn and changes of senior officials that we just have to be much more cognizant and much more ready and available to provide the information to these people coming in or departing service to make sure that the records are protected. So I'm going to, without further ado, flip the slide and start with just a little bit of a background, a little context before I get into some of the specifics of what we've been doing at NARA and within my office, the Office of the Chief Records Officer, working with agencies. I think it's important for us, and we always emphasize this point, that a transition occurs every 4 years. So for us, it doesn't matter whether it's like the most recent transition where you have a new president in its first term, or it's President Obama starting his second term. So the approach is the same. The information that we provide to agencies and that we communicate to agencies does not change. I know it's a whole different story on the presidential side, and John will talk about that. But for us, our focus is making sure that the agencies are well positioned to support the staff that they have to get through the transition and make sure the important points that are covered under the Federal Records Act are covered. So we do have some help. And as the slide notes, there is the Center for Presidential Transition, and we do get support from the Partnership for Public Service, which is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. They maintain this website, presidentialtransition.org, and there's a lot of really good information on there. We've written a couple of articles, we've written a blog post, and they're all available on that website that sort of cover the high points of what we talk about with agencies. But there's a lot going on, and I don't want to make it sound like it's, you know, just NARA out there talking to agencies. There's a lot of other agencies that are involved in a transition. So for those other agencies, so let me talk a little bit about, before we get to NARA, there are really 4 support agencies that have significant roles in supporting a transition. The first and probably most important is GSA, General Services Administration, and they're important because they manage transition councils, the Agency Transition Directors Council that they host. They run the directory, which is on this website. They find the spaces for the transition teams as they're staging the new folks coming in, and of course they support the inauguration process. So in addition to NARA and GSA, there are also OPM is significantly involved for the people that are coming in. The Office of Government Ethics is important for ethics review. And then NARA, we're here for records and archiving, and that's what we're going to do an overview of today. So I do want to note that on this slide, the Presidential Transition Directory that GSA hosts, you'll see, I don't know if you can see it on the left side, there's a tab, for records management. And we worked really hard with the other 3 agencies, including GSA, to make sure that the guidance that we have for agencies is present on their website and that it gets into the hands of the agency transition directors so that information is communicated. So let's talk now, and I want to focus more on this and what we are doing at the National Archives to support transition. So generally speaking, our focus is on communication and guidance. We develop a lot of products which we review and update every 4 years as we prepare for a transition, and I'll get to some of those resources in a minute. We do briefings to agency officials. We've done lots of virtual meetings, and we have been using our blog, Records Express, much more during this transition and putting content up there for agencies and for the public. Another thing that is really significant that we did this year is we issued a memo from the Archivist of the United States to all federal agency heads. We sent that out in November, and you can see a quote here at the top, which talks about how important it is that agencies work with the records professionals, including the senior agency official for records management in each agency and the agency records officer, to ensure that records management is communicated and new and departing officials are aware of their record-keeping responsibilities. So it's not anything particularly revelatory. It is a message that is based on good governance, on good record-keeping practices, and a lot of the information that we routinely talk to agencies about. So I want to talk a little bit more about what we specifically focused on this year during this transition. And you can see, the topics on the slide. And there really were these 4 areas. And these were the 4 areas that we highlighted for the archivist in the memo that was sent to agency heads. And first and foremost, email. So we have been talking about email for quite some time. There are still occasionally issues with email, so we're not going to stop talking about email anytime soon. But we want to make sure that agencies coming in, political appointees, understand that as a general rule, they should not be using official personal accounts to conduct business, that they should only be using the official accounts. But we recognize that, there may be exigent circumstances where they might need to use a personal account. And in those cases, we remind them of the requirements in the Federal Records Act that state that they have 20 days to forward any of those emails into government record-keeping systems. So we've been talking about that for quite some time, and we continue talking about email and proper email management. And then, of course, we work with agencies to do oversight of how agencies are managing those email records. We also focused this time on entrance and exit guidance so that whether there are officials departing service or coming in, that there is a process that ensures that those officials are briefed. One of the things that we developed were some checklists, and I'll talk about that in a second when we get to the resources that agencies can use for onboarding and exiting and making sure that they have something that they can use as a practical tool to support those processes. So in general, these are all things that we're probably aware of, but when entering service, we want to remind agencies that they keep personal business out of agency administered systems, and that there is a separation between the personal and the official. While they're working, we want to make sure that they get trained, that they know who their officials are, who the senior agency official for records management is, who the agency records officer is, and that they're following the guidance and getting briefed on that guidance. And then finally, when they leave service, we have to make sure that the exit briefings take place, that they understand what they can remove from the agency, to make sure that those materials are cleared by the records program, and that all of that is reviewed through established processes within the agency. Social media is another area we're spending much more time talking about, and this is an area where we want to make sure that as, officials get assigned a social media account, that they understand that social media accounts, that are created or used for official business must stay under the control of the agency, and that when they do leave service, that there is a break and a designation that, this account now is under the control of the agency, and that person moves on, and it's clear that that account no longer goes with the official once they leave service. So there's a lot of guidance and requirements that we've issued around social media, around tweets, as it becomes more common and omnipresent for officials who are appointed to agencies, to make sure that they understand the control, to make sure that they understand that there are records and that those records are managed and maintained by the agency through established record-keeping practices. And then finally, web content. It's important that agencies understand that information that's up on their website is often records, and by default, we would consider them to be records. They must be identified, they must be scheduled, and they must be dispositioned according to records management requirements. And one of the things that we've talked specifically about during a transition is there's frequently major redesigns of web pages at a transition. There are changes to agency leadership, and we want to make sure that those changes are documented. We want to make sure that the pages that preceded the revised pages are properly captured, and they don't just go away, that they are under record-keeping control within the agency. So the first step is making sure that there is guidance that communicates that records that are on websites do need to be managed like any other kinds of records within agencies. And then my last slide right here is really my attempt to sort of bring together the resources that we have been focusing on. I mentioned that we are using our blog, Record Express, much more. I highlighted on this slide 3 specific posts that we did for transition to talk about some of the general resources that I mentioned, the entrance and exit checklist, and the specific guidance around email and social media accounts. We also have a lot of information on our records management website, including the memo that the archivist sent in November, and all of the tools, the checklists, the videos, which really are part of our Documenting Your Public Service website. Documenting Your Public Service used to be a hard copy document brochure that we used to hand out during these times. That is long gone, and now it's just a website that compiles all of these resources in one place where you can find it on this link. So hopefully you will find these resources useful. If you have any questions, I have my group address right here, RM Policy, where we've been fielding questions about transition. And we'd love to hear from you and see if you have any suggestions, whether you also find these resources useful in the agencies that you work. So with that, I see I'm a little bit over time, so I'm going to stop and turn the proceedings back to our moderator.
I think we're just going to go right over to John Laster for the next presentation.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and Lawrence has set me up as being entertaining, so this is a little bit more of a challenge. I'll have to figure out how to make this a little more exciting. Unlike Lawrence, we don't have to worry about a president transition except when the president changes. And so to make it clear, when I talk about presidential transition, I'm talking about taking the material that is collected by or in the control of the executive office of the president and moving that from Naras into Naras custody at the end of a presidential administration. So one of the very easiest things that happens in the National Archives and maybe in all of government is the switch of legal custody. The Presidential Records Act makes this very simple. When a president is no longer president, the records are in our legal control. So there's no paperwork, no government forms, no sign your name here. It's often interesting because people would think, and sometimes there would be more something written around this process. There's absolutely nothing. It makes it very easy, and that's kind of where easy stops to a certain extent. So when we talk about transitions, talking about moving the records into our physical custody, whether those be three-dimensional, whether that's textual or GIFs or something like that, or moving electronic records into our custody. So I want to talk a little bit about textual records and how that generally works as audiovisual material. And I'm speaking here about audiovisual material that's on media, as well as GIFs that are coming in from head of state GIFs, as well as from the American people and those from citizens overseas. So I put up 3 pictures here to kind of give you a little idea of what this process is like. And it's very basic terms. It is NARA going to the White House, picking up this material, bringing it back. We have, my team has lead responsibility, but really a team effort across the agency. You know, we have details coming from all over to help support this activity that only happens once every 4 to 8 years. NARA almost always has details stationed in the White House as well, working with their records managers to provide support. We get support from the military, which is very much appreciated. And it is a process. Again, we're taking vans over, we're taking trucks over, loading things up, bringing those back to NARA facilities in the National Capital Region. In a traditional transition, generally to term, the president has announced where he will be building his library, and NARA had time to establish a temporary facility there. So at the same time we're bringing these records in, we're also turning around and shipping them back out. And this becomes a very complex process of ensuring you're maintaining intellectual control all along the way, because these shipments start before a president leaves office, and it is true with every presidential administration that something winds up at the temporary site that the administration needs back for continued work. So we're bringing it in, gaining that intellectual control, and then prepping it and shipping it out either via truck or plane to the temporary location. On the left, you see just standard pallets moving out. On the right is the more challenging aspect of GIFs. Pallets of records, or records that we build into pallets. They come in boxes. It's very organized. The White House does not give us GIFs in boxes. They give us, and we take them in our hands, secure them as much as we can to get them back into our building safely, where we have to build generally custom housing, and then pack them in larger boxes or crates to survive a trip across the country. And what you're looking at there is the inside of an 18-wheeler that's being loaded up to take Obama gifts to the facility outside of Chicago. And the last thing I want to just kind of mention as part of, as we move on to some of talking about the challenges of this particular transition, is the fact that it's a one-term transition. NARA has had the leisure, this is the first one in 28 years, NARA has had the leisure of having a transition planning time. No administration, regardless of party, wants to be heavily involved in planning for a transition, right, when they're running for re-election. But if it's the second term, it's a much more orderly process. We have more time. So we had this compressed time frame. You're talking days instead of months and years to pull all this together. The other thing is doing this during a pandemic. I think this was the greatest challenge and the most stressful part of a transition I've ever experienced. So that middle picture is one that was taken during the Obama transition, and that's so very typical. It's us, it's the military working side by side, you know, chunking boxes, packing things. It's an activity that by its very nature has everyone in close proximity, and none of that was possible. And trying to figure out the means of keeping staff as safe as possible while doing an inherently activity was really a challenge for us. There was a lot of planning that went into it. There were a lot of backup teams and backups to those backups in case there were infections. Knock on wood, we have gotten through the vast majority of this and everything, and we've had good luck with no infections. But it truly is something that has been very unique and affected, and it frankly added a lot of stress to everybody trying to keep everybody safe. But I want to switch over now to the other aspect. We talked about physical custody of three-dimensional, whether those are records or not. I'm sorry, whether it's GIFs or textual records. Really how things are changing. So there's a lot of information on the slide, but I'll go through it really quickly to say the green represents textual pages that came in during administration. Clinton, 70+ million pages of textual records, and he's the high point. No administration prior, and I would imagine no administration after will have that many papers. George W. Bush around 60 million, Obama around 30 million, and Trump will come in somewhere around 12 to 13 million pages. And you see this very steady, consistent decline. If we look at the blue, what you're seeing there is the volume of electronic records we're bringing. And it's not a steady decline, it's not a steady increase, it's a strikingly large increase. For Clinton, that's 2 terabytes. For George W. Bush, we're up to 80 terabytes. For Obama, it's 250 terabytes. And for Trump, while I will caveat it to say this number is still a little in flux as we work through this, it's around the 500 terabyte range of data that's coming in. And then finally, I just added an email because you can begin to see that trend. 20 million emails for Clinton, 200 million for George W. Bush, 300 million for Obama. And we just don't know yet. I didn't want to even begin to guess at a figure for the Trump administration. But it's important to know this is just the email is a very small portion of this. And this is something that I think I know is not unique to the National Archives. It's certainly not unique to just a presidential administration. I think everybody across in any archives is struggling. How do we deal with this? This is the challenge we're facing of taking this data in, which is dozens of different types of records in dozens of different applications, all sorts of software. Thankfully, most things are going away from proprietary software, which is good, but it still has to all be stripped from that software before it can be ingested into our system. So we're no longer in a situation with the textual records and the GIFs where we can throw bodies at it. We are in a situation where it's really, how fast can the computers do it, and how quickly can we come to agreement working together in the best way to take ever-changing electronic records and move them from a software-dependent system to a software-independent system where they can be preserved for the long term and accessed. I wish I could say we have the answer. We don't have the answer at all. We're getting better. We're learning with each one. But as the volume continues to go up, as the type of records change and modify, it continues to be a challenge. And close out really quickly with this last slide, and Lawrence talked a little bit about this as well. Things are new. We've worked since the Clinton administration on freezing whitehouse.gov, the websites or other websites that are coming along. Social media really began to be used very heavily during the Obama administration. And while this is public information that's out there, we wanted to figure out a way, how can we keep this material available? The National Archives gets a preservation copy of these presidential records coming in for long-term storage, but we wanted to be in a situation where we can make these available. You know, if you could see them January 19th, you should be able to see them January 21st. And so we've worked with the platforms to basically take these official accounts and freeze them and turn over control of them to the National Archives so that we can make them available in easily in a presentation format. So the Obama administration stuck with using formal or official accounts. The administration, several individuals use personal accounts, which is, again, it's a change. We're archived appropriately, and so we have those for preservation. But we're again struggling with how do we put a presentation copy out there. So again, it just emphasizes no matter what the electronic records are, it's going to continue to be a process of finding the best way to make these records available, to bring them in a timely manner. And I think that's really something that is in no way unique to us. I think we're all facing that. So as just one last thing, as with Lawrence, I've got a link to NARA's guidance on presidential records. It provides a lot of useful information about both incoming administration, outgoing administration, and how the National Archives relates and works with through that process. You can also go to our presidential transitions page at archive.gov. It's got a lot of good information as well. There's a link to the Presidential Records Act. And finally, always feel free to reach out to me at any point if you have questions. I'm happy to answer if I can. So thank you again for this opportunity. Really appreciate being able to talk a little bit about what we do around presidential transitions. So I will turn it back over to Beth if you want to pass on to the next presenter.
Thank you. Thank you, John and Lawrence, our National Archives presenters. It's really interesting. I wish we had a lot more time to hear more from both of you. I do see your questions. A couple of folks have put questions in the chat box, and we will get to those at the end of the presentations. And now I'm going to turn this over to Jody Foley from Montana.
Hi, everyone. I'd like to start by thanking CoSA and NARA for giving me the opportunity to talk about Montana's recent experience transferring two-term Governor Steve Bullock's records to our facility. And to clarify that since I'm now retired, I am not speaking as an employee of the Montana Historical Society, but rather from my personal experience. If I can get the slides going here. So I do use the word merging here very purposefully in my title, as a reminder that we weren't working in a vacuum. it's understandable that the governor and the staff would approach their work in more insular fashion, but for archivists, this work is part of a continuum of workflows, policies, procedures, content types that make up our government records collections. So throughout this project, we tried to instill the idea of this broader context in our colleagues in the executive office to build confidence and collaboration and ease concerns of records management being just one more thing to worry about. Some of the challenges that we faced, we were dependent on gubernatorial administration cooperation. Some administrations are more open and worked more, or had more time, I guess. We also had an outdated workflow and related forms and procedures, and at the time we were trying to establish a preservation capability. As with everybody else, staff reductions. We're not the records management entity for the state. We work in records management, but the Secretary of State has that training capacity. We are the state archives. I wanted to clarify that piece, but we have lost folks, and so there are challenges there. There's also changes in the governor's office use of technology, as already has been talked about, but specifically for us, the use of a CRM. And we also had a pretty high-profile governor. He's the chair of the NGA, who was a presidential candidate and a US Senate candidate. And of course, COVID. So these are some of the things that we used in terms of trying to get through sort of our tools. And I'm going to pass that just for time's sake. So first thing, looking at education as one of our major tools, we learned a lot from the Access grant that CoSA just finished this last fall, and NGA publications about learning to speak the language of the governor's office or whoever you're dealing with. So this image is just supposed to show this idea of using language that's going to make sense to them in your education. Efficiency, open government, transparency, all the myriad legal issues that can come with not providing access or not doing records management properly. And of course, something they don't necessarily talk too much about, but records are their legacy. Okay, so we used education to update retention schedules, which we made as a collaborative process, meaning that we learned about functions and functionalities of the different programs from the people who did the work and their specific use of the CRM, because that was going to be a big issue for us. But we also looked outward, looking to other states like Washington, Texas, Alaska, all of whom helped us out with some of this, just how they were dealing with things. We learned from them. Lots and lots of staff tours, and I know that might seem a little silly, but it's a way of building interest and keying in on natural interests, but also instilling this idea that these records are going to be part of a continuum, and it is that legacy piece. Sharing resources, as I said, lots of great stuff from Siri, from Access, the grant, and those were very helpful with us. And learning that we really needed to have regular meetings, even if they were just a stand-up quick meeting of this is what we've got accomplished so far, and these are the things that we need to do next. The next piece that was really important for us was communication and relationship building. We found that there wasn't a single person who was really a trained records manager, and that was the only thing they did. It was something where it was added to other duties as assigned kind of thing. So we had to branch out a little bit and find layers of contacts. Folks in the council and boards coordinator, because they were really heavy in using the CRM, staff assistants, intern supervisors, and April Sparks, who works on Siri. She's the government records archivist at Montana, but also works on Siri for CoSA, did a fantastic job in building some of those relationships. Also, having IT speak to IT, we have an internal IT person, but he was able to talk to the folks in the state system, but also IT within the governor's office. Brendan Reiki did a wonderful job there. Again, regular meetings on the calendar, first quarterly, and and in the final year monthly, and then at the final quarter every day, once a week. It seemed like every day. But we also wanted to let them know that we were getting training as well. We had lots of material based on DAS, lots of CoSA webinars, NAGARA webinars, NARA webinars, and we let them know that this is a learning process for us, and I think that helped for them to understand that we were reaching beyond our borders into best practice. And flexibility. I think if there's nothing else that we've learned in this last year is that we have to be flexible. COVID-related closes of offices meant, okay, let's switch and start working on research, updating our forms. We also learned from the governor's staff to communicate the way that they do. We learned the art of bullet points. The extracurriculars for the governor's office, meaning the presidential run and the Senate run, gave us the opportunity to really talk about public versus private records. And we learned that we also had to just work with what we had. We didn't have a preservation system, but again, we had training in DAS, all the webinars. We had started the work towards getting Archivematica up and running, and over the past year, but before that, actually got enough ammo, if you will, for us to get Archivematica moving forward. And then, like everyone else, we learned through COVID that we maybe not be able to go over to the offices and shadow folks to figure out how they're doing things, but screenshots, team meetings, and I think being able to share things from Realm about physical safety and that sort of thing helped the governor's office. Kind of gave that idea that we're in this together. So what were we able to accomplish? We were able to get material transferred as a SQL database, about 3 terabytes, Excel spreadsheets that have keyword searchability, unique identifiers with attachments in separate storage, the permanent records, and training materials, which we felt were really going to be helpful because they have a lot of screenshots that show the experience of the CRM. And as far as social media, the state library captures the websites, and there's a great deal of CRM or of social media that goes into CRM, but a lot of that material we just weren't able to get. But is this perfect? Of course not, but it gives us enough that we can build our abilities and move forward into a better experience the next time around. And here's some contacts. Rich Arstad is now the Montana State Archivist, and April Sparks, as I said, is the Government Records Archivist, and this is my contact information. So I know I threw a lot at you, but I hope there's lots of good questions. Thank you so much.
And we're ready for our final speaker, Alan Ramsey from Connecticut.
All right, thank you, Beth, and everyone. So I'm Alan Ramsey. I'm the Assistant State Archivist at the Connecticut State Library in the State Archives Unit, and I'm going to talk about our transition, which actually happened about 2 years ago now, or actually almost a little bit longer. So I just want to start with records management. The State Library is the Public Records Office and the official state archives for the state of Connecticut. So we have authority over the Records Management Program and the State Archives Program, which is in general statutes as listed there. And each agency, including the governor's office and the office of the lieutenant governor, are required to appoint a records management liaison officer. This could be anybody from clerks on up to senior officers. We really stress that senior officers be the RMLOs, but that doesn't always happen. Typically in the governor's office, it's the general counsel or the deputy general counsel that is the RMLO. So this really works through the legal office. And then we have, as I've got listed here, some resources, our Public Records Policy 5, which is disposition of public records, which lays out how you can, the disposition authorization process, and then agency-specific retention schedules, which we have one for the Office of the Governor, which 23 of the 25 record series are permanent, meaning they come to us at the end of the term. 2 of them are not permanent, and all of the lieutenant governor's records are permanent unless there's something on a general schedule. Typically, we take in everything from both offices, including gifts, as mentioned earlier. In the NARA portion, we do actually end up taking gifts because they typically, when they're transitioning out, the governor and lieutenant governor don't want to take all the gifts with them, nor does state ethics allow them to do so. So that's actually increased over the years. Last 2 or 3 administrations, we've taken in a lot more gifts along with paper and of course a lot more electronic. So at the beginning or during the start of a term, or in the start of or during the term, the state librarian and or the public records administrator sends a memo welcoming new agency heads, commissioners, senior management that goes out all over the state executive branch agency, which I should clarify, we only have authority over the state executive branch agencies and the municipalities and of some quasi-public. So we don't have authority over the other 2 branches. But we do send a memo usually at the beginning of after the election, so November, as folks are starting to come in, trying to build ourselves into the transition process. Sometimes during the term, we will do training. And so second line will do some education training. When Governor Malloy's staff came in, we had a transition from a Republican administration to a Democratic administration. So that was my first transition. They requested training, and we went over and we went through how the records management program works, the state archives program works, and it was with staff of the governor's office. During the last transition, we met with the lieutenant governor and her staff to go through records management and state archives procedures and policies and things of that nature. And we've done some in between during the terms, especially around email, appropriate use of email, using the public systems. If you're going to use the private email, that you're making sure it gets into the public system, and that you don't, unless you really need to, that you don't use the private email. Typically, we don't transfer records before the end of the term, but in the Malloy administration, when it was going into the second term, they were running out of storage space. So we did transfer records at that point. And we're always available to answer questions. At the end of a term, we work with the agency arm of law. This, like I said, usually in the governor's office is the legal office that we work with, starting usually in the summer when we know they're not going to run for re-election, or it could be even when they're running for election, although I haven't been in experience with that. And then early fall, we start to schedule meetings to discuss the transfer process, to show archive staff where all the storage rooms are, basement, closets, so forth. And then we also, on the right here, we put out a Office of Public Records Administrator puts out of what to do with the records, because we've also had a lot of agency closures and consolidations. So we have some guidance and best practices on how to sort of make sure your records are managed appropriately and within the records management policies and procedures. Oops, went back. So just quickly, in July of 2018, we actually had a very large meeting. We work with our Department of Administrative Services. They provide the boxes, and the Bureau of Enterprise Systems and Technology, which is under them, is the statewide IT. The Chief Information Officer was very interested in how we would preserve the electronic records. We had a very large meeting in person with all those involved in the transition from DAS to us to the Chief Information Officer. And then, as it says here, October through January, we arranged pickup. We could only take in so much at a time due to our cargo van limit, our size. So we make multiple trips to the Capitol. Sometimes things are, still held back as they're reviewing things. In January this year, again, just as in the previous transfer from Governor Rell to Governor Malloy, we received an external hard drive with all the electronic records from the shared drives and network storage spaces, and all the internal hard drives for the first time. So we had a lot of drives to work with. And we also transitioned the social media. We took control of the accounts in the afternoon of the inauguration, put up our disclaimer that says they're now under the state library's authority and being preserved, and started to download the content out of social media. And if you want to know more about that process, Barbara Austin, our digital records archivist, and myself, and Jamie Patrick Burns from North Carolina did a series webinar on how to work with social media accounts. So I urge you to check that out along with all the other Siri videos on the CoSA YouTube channel. And I know that this my contact information. I know that was a lot in a little bit of time, but definitely can take any questions. So I will pass it back to Beth.
Thank you, Alan and Jody and John Lawrence, all our speakers. That was a lot of information in a short time. And we've already got several questions in the chat, so it's time for our question period now. And so I'll go through the questions that we've already got in chat. And also, Alan, Kathy Marquis asked if it's possible for you to share your ready-to-go flyer. That would be great. There are actually two questions, I think, for John Laster that relate to gifts. So let's start out with gifts. That's always a good place to start. One is, do you have an estimate on gifts or objects received from the latest administration compared to recent administrations? And then the second gift-related question was, do these gifts actually belong to the individual or to NARA?
So the current gift count is very much in flux for the Trump administration. I would say it was around 7,000. Previous administrations, more 10s to 20,000. Again, you're talking one term versus two terms. Also, NARA works more aggressively each administration to really hone in, working with the White House Gift Office on those things that would be suitable for retention as to become museum artifacts. So there's a little bit of a decline there. The gifts, it depends. The law does allow for a president to purchase certain gifts and other gifts, depending on what that are under a certain cost value, they can keep. There's no one answer to that other than it depends, but the president does have the authority and the opportunity to purchase outright certain gifts and to accept other gifts if they're under a legal or under a monetary threshold.
Thank you, John. And then we've got two questions that relate to social media accounts. And the first one is, how does the suspension of social media accounts for terms of service violations affect the ability of NARA to archive them? And for either of you, John or Lawrence, do you anticipate increased policy or regulation of social media for official government use in the future?
So I'll let Lawrence, this is John, I'll let Lawrence take the second one. The first one, the answer is really no. White House uses a tool that basically captures social media content in real time, and that is preserved for transition or for passing to NARA as presidential record. It does get complicated in how you present that and having a presentation copy. But as far as actually getting the records as required under the Presidential Record Act, that would not cause a problem. And I'm assuming that's just a hypothetical question. Over to you, Lawrence.
Thanks, John. Yeah, so Lauren, thanks for the question. As I said, the answer is yes. And one of the things that we have been talking about quite a bit lately is that our current social media guidance, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, was issued sometime around 2014. And there's been a lot that has happened since then. And as we're working with agencies and learning more about how they're using social media, we're acknowledging that there are some gaps that we want to close. So it is something that we are going to be working on and thinking about, what the next version of social media guidance is. And then that's going to feed a number of things. So you mentioned regulation, I would say oversight. It's certainly something where we go in and do inspections of agencies' programs. If we have the updated policy, we will certainly use that as the benchmark and the guide in doing inspections and assessments of agency programs. So certainly something that we are aware of and working on, and hopefully we'll be able to add that to our toolkit. One of the things that we've been doing for many, many years now is all of our oversight work is focused on email and other electronic records, and we're trying to build our capacity internally to be able to do not only new policy, but the ability to execute oversight of increasingly different formats of electronic records, and that reflect how agencies are working right now. So, yeah, it's on the radar and in the works. Thanks for the question.
Thank you. And we've got one last question. We're coming up right on the hour, so we've got this one last question, and then we'll go into the final announcements. For anyone who has an answer for this, have you transferred, or do you anticipate transferring records from Microsoft Teams, such as chats or conversations? Any of the presenters have anything on this? I know it's something a lot of us are interested in.
This is Alan. We just within the last 6 to 12 months started rolling out Microsoft 365 with Teams, so we're just starting to go through with what how that works and how to manage records in the system. So we're not even at the point of transferring things out of it.
This is Jody.
Yeah,
we're in exactly the same situation. It's too new.
Yep, and here at NARA, 98% of the government is using Office 365. I mean, we are certainly monitoring that. We have a 365 user group with a bunch of federal agencies where we're collaborating and sharing how the functionality within the system is going to be used, not only to manage but also to transfer records. So that's something that we're going to be talking about much more, and hopefully, working with the agencies and getting some guidance out to them.
Right. Great. Thank you. Thank you all for the questions. Thanks for the answers and for all the information that you have provided. This has just been a wonderful program, and we're right at 4 o'clock, so I'm going to turn over the bubble of control to our hosts to wrap this up.
Thank you, Beth. We appreciate you monitoring and moderating all of this. There is one more question, so I'm going to sneak it in real quick just because I think our NARA people are going to help answer this quickly. Catherine Giles asked, is a presidential library required to exist, and how do you determine what records are in the library's custody versus NARA's? And that may be longer than you want to answer, but take whichever part. John, Lawrence?
Okay, so I'll try to cover this quickly. No, there is no requirement that a presidential library exist, but I will note from Hoover forward, those libraries are NARA controlled. So they're not independent entities in any way. They're fully part of the National Archives and Records Administration. So whether a president builds using private funds a facility to our standard that those records are kept in or not, they will always be in NARA's control, and the entirety of the collection, regardless of where it exists, will be administered by National Archives archivists.
Thank you, John, for that. And we know there's probably a lot more questions out there that everybody would like to know about, and we encourage you to follow us and attend some of our other webinars. We have a member webinar coming up here in another couple of weeks. Topics still to be determined, but we assure you that the NARA webinars and are also out there too, and we'll be having more of those later on in the season. Sari will have a webinar too in March. So check out the CoSA website for more information about a lot of this information. It's also great for lots of resources, and this is how you contact us at CoSA. And in addition, here's some places you can contact NARA as well. So we hope you will reach out to both of these organizations if you have questions or thoughts or anything. And again, we really appreciate your attendance today. We thank you so much, and we hope that you will take a minute and provide us feedback in the evaluation, because that really does help us as we prepare future webinar topics. So thank you again, everyone. We appreciate your time today. Thank you, speakers and presenters. We appreciate all of your efforts and time. And with that, everyone, please stay warm, have a great weekend, and take care. Thank you so much.